A CEO needs loyal employees, Victoria announced at the Thornton Foundation gala, her champagne flute catching the crystal chandelier light. The assembled business elite nodded approvingly as my wife delivered her trademark philosophy with practiced precision. I stood beside her in my tailored tuxedo, playing the supportive husband role I'd perfected over 8 years of marriage. Alexander Ashford, former literature professor turned private consultant, reduced to arm candy at corporate events. The irony wasn't lost on me. Loyalty matters above everything else, Victoria continued, her voice carrying that authoritative tone that made board members scramble and competitors nervous. Dedication to the company, to the vision, to success itself. That's what separates winners from mediocrity. Richard Thornton, the silver-haired chairman of Victoria's board, raised his glass. Spoken like a true leader, Victoria. Your company's employee retention rates are remarkable. She smiled that perfect CEO smile, the one that graced magazine covers and investor presentations. I believe in rewarding loyalty appropriately. 3 weeks later, those words would haunt her. I discovered the truth on a Tuesday night in February, hunched over tax documents in my home office, while Victoria attended another emergency board meeting, the third one that week, the fifth this month. Her dedication to corporate governance had become impressively frequent. The expense reports lay scattered across my mahogany desk like evidence at a crime scene. Victoria's assistant had sent them for our accountant, but I'd volunteered to organize the paperwork. My academic background made me meticulous with details, a trait Victoria often praised when it served her purposes. Employee retention bonuses, read one line item. $15,000 to Lance Dalton, head of product development, a handsome 32-year-old with the kind of confident smile that made investors open their wallets. Performance incentives for Paige Morrison, marketing director, $12,000. She was 28, blonde, ambitious, and recently divorced. Discretionary compensation for Miguel Santos, finance manager, $10,000. Fresh from business school, eager to please, desperate to prove himself worthy of his position. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. Each bonus recipient shared certain characteristics. Young, attractive, directly reporting to Victoria. All had received their payments on specific dates that corresponded with curious hotel charges on the corporate credit card. I leaned back in my leather chair, processing the implications. The Four Seasons, the Ritz-Carlton, the St. Regis, always during supposed business trips that somehow required only one company representative. My phone buzzed. Victoria's text. Meeting running late again. Don't wait up. Important merger discussions. At 11:30 on a Tuesday night. How dedicated. I returned to the documents with renewed focus. Calendar entries, hotel receipts, bonus authorizations. The timeline became unmistakable. Payment patterns aligned perfectly with documented private meetings. 5 employees, 5 distinct patterns, 5 affairs funded by shareholder money. The front door clicked open around midnight. Victoria's heels tapped across the marble foyer with that familiar rhythm that once quickened my pulse. Now, it sounded like a countdown timer. "Alexander?" Her voice carried from the kitchen. "Are you still awake?" "In the office," I called back, quickly arranging the papers into innocent-looking piles. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing her charcoal business suit, though her lipstick had vanished and her hair showed signs of recent adjustment. The merger discussions must have been particularly intense. "How did the meeting go?" I asked, not looking up from the computer screen. "Productive. Complex negotiations require personal attention." She moved to the window, gazing out at our manicured garden. "These deals don't happen without building trust." "Trust," I repeated, savoring the word. "Essential in business relationships." "Exactly. You understand better than most people." She turned toward me, and for a moment, her mask slipped. Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt? Concern? The expression vanished before I could identify it. The tax documents look complicated this year, I said casually. Lots of new expense categories. Her shoulders tensed slightly. The company expanded rapidly. New initiatives require investment. Employee retention programs, performance incentives. Very generous. Good people deserve recognition. Her voice carried a defensive edge. Loyalty should be rewarded. I nodded thoughtfully. Absolutely. Though some of these bonuses seem quite substantial for mid-level employees. They're not mid-level anymore. Promotions come with increased responsibility. She moved toward the door. I'm exhausted. These merger talks are draining. I'm sure they are. Building trust takes considerable energy. She paused at the threshold. What do you mean by that? Nothing specific. Just observing that personal attention, as you mentioned, requires significant time investment. Victoria studied my face for several seconds. I maintained neutral expression, the same academic poker face that served me well during faculty meetings and dissertation defenses. Good night, Alexander. Good night, darling. Sweet dreams about your merger. Her footsteps faded up the staircase. I waited until the bedroom door closed before returning to the documents. Lance Dalton's bonus coincided with a weekend strategy retreat at the Four Seasons Napa Valley. Just the two of them, according to the hotel reservation. Very intimate strategic planning. Paige Morrison's incentive payment followed a client presentation in Miami, the Ritz-Carlton South Beach. February weather must have demanded extensive poolside negotiations. Miguel Santos received his compensation after a financial review session in Manhattan, the St. Regis, New York. Premium accommodations for premium loyalty. 2 additional employees rounded out Victoria's retention program. Jennifer Walsh from Human Resources, recently promoted to director level. David Kim from Operations, fast-tracked to vice president despite his limited experience. 5 affairs in 2 years. All subordinates dependent on Victoria for career advancement. Power exploited systematically, funded by company resources, disguised as legitimate business expenses. I compiled everything into organized folders, expense reports highlighted, calendar entries cross-referenced, hotel receipts chronologically arranged. The evidence painted a clear picture of corporate misconduct masquerading as employee development. But divorce alone seemed insufficient response. Victoria had committed fraud against shareholders, violated corporate governance policies, and abused her position systematically. Multiple audiences deserved to know the truth. The financial press would find this story irresistible. Female CEO pays subordinates for silence practically wrote itself as a headline. Patricia Walsh from the Business Journal had covered Victoria's company extensively, always with glowing reviews. She'd appreciate learning about the CEO's alternative management techniques. I spent the next 3 days assembling a comprehensive press package, timeline documented, patterns established, financial paper trail highlighted with surgical precision, every bonus payment correlated with hotel charges, every business trip linked to subsequent compensation. The anonymous tip went to Patricia Walsh on Friday afternoon, sent from a secure email account through a public library computer. The evidence spoke for itself, but I included background context explaining the systematic nature of Victoria's loyalty program. Patricia called Victoria's office within 2 hours, requesting comment for an investigative piece about corporate governance and executive expense policies. Victoria's assistant scheduled the interview for Monday morning. That weekend, Victoria seemed unusually nervous. She paced around our townhouse, checking her phone constantly, making hushed calls from her private office. The merger discussions apparently required round-the-clock attention. "Everything all right with the deal?" I asked over Sunday brunch. "Complex situations demand careful handling," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "Sometimes business gets messy before it gets resolved." Messy how? Competing interests, personal agendas. People don't always act professionally when money's involved. I buttered my toast thoughtfully. Sounds like trust issues. Exactly. You can't always predict how people will react when their interests are threatened, particularly when those interests involve personal relationships. Victoria's coffee cup rattled against the saucer. What kind of personal relationships? Business relationships that become personal happens frequently in corporate environments. Boundaries get blurred. I maintain strict professional boundaries, she said quickly. Of course. Your reputation for ethical leadership is well established. She relaxed slightly. I work hard to maintain that reputation. I'm sure it will serve you well, whatever comes next. Monday morning arrived with unusual tension. Victoria left early for her interview with Patricia Walsh, claiming she wanted to prepare thoroughly for questions about company policies and executive decision-making. I waited at home, organizing my consulting projects while monitoring news websites for breaking business stories. The call came at 2:15. Mr. Ashford? Patricia Walsh's voice carried excitement barely contained by professional courtesy. I believe we should meet, today, if possible. Regarding what matter? Your wife's loyalty program. I have questions that require clarification. We met at a downtown coffee shop, away from Victoria's usual haunts. Patricia arrived with a thick folder and the expression of a journalist who'd discovered treasure. This is remarkable, she said without preamble. 5 employees, systematic payments, hotel receipts matching every bonus authorization. The pattern is undeniable. I assume you've verified the documentation? Triple-checked. Your wife's assistant was very helpful, actually. Provided additional calendar details when I asked about executive travel patterns. Patricia leaned forward. She seemed relieved to finally discuss it with someone. Relieved? Apparently she's been uncomfortable with the arrangement for months. NDAs prevented her from speaking officially, but she confirmed everything through careful questioning. I sipped my coffee, processing this development. Victoria's assistant had been complicit but unwilling, another victim of the loyalty program's systematic abuse. What's your timeline for publication? Tomorrow's front page, business section lead story. CEO's loyalty program included personal benefits. The headline practically writes itself. And Victoria's response? Declined to comment beyond stating that all employee compensation follows board-approved policies. Patricia smiled grimly. I have copies of those policies. None mention discretionary bonuses for personal services. The story broke Tuesday morning with devastating precision. Front page of the Business Journal, complete with expense report reproductions and timeline graphics showing the correlation between hotel stays and bonus payments. Victoria's company stock dropped 12% before noon. Institutional investors demanded emergency board meetings. Her attorney's office issued carefully worded statements about reviewing internal policies and conducting thorough investigations. My phone rang constantly, reporters seeking comment about my wife's corporate practices. I declined all interviews, maintaining dignified silence while Victoria's world crumbled in real time. She returned home that evening looking haggard, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled panic. We need to talk, she announced, dropping her briefcase with uncharacteristic carelessness. About what? Don't play games, Alexander. I know you leaked those documents. I looked up from my book, maintaining academic calm. That's quite an accusation. Who else had access? Who else would benefit from destroying my reputation? Perhaps someone concerned about shareholder fraud, corporate governance violations, systematic abuse of power. I closed the book deliberately. The list of potential sources seems extensive. This will destroy everything I've built. You built it on fraudulent expense reports and abusive pressure. Perhaps collapse was inevitable. Victoria's facade finally cracked completely. Those employees were willing participants, adults making career decisions. Adults dependent on you for advancement, housing, healthcare, professional references. Adults you systematically exploited using company resources. I never forced anyone. You never needed to. Power imbalances create coercion without explicit threats. I stood, moving to the window. Your loyalty program exploited that dynamic perfectly. The board will support me. This will pass. I turned back toward her. Richard Thornton called this afternoon. The board scheduled an emergency session for tomorrow morning. Institutional investors are demanding your resignation. Her face went pale. You spoke with Richard? He wanted to express concern about the family's reputation during this difficult period. Very thoughtful of him. What did you tell him? That I support thorough investigations into corporate misconduct. Transparency serves everyone's interests. Victoria sank into the leather armchair, her executive composure completely abandoned. This will ruin me. You ruined yourself. I simply ensured appropriate audiences learned about your management techniques. I can fight this, hire better attorneys, challenge the evidence. The evidence is your own expense reports, hotel receipts signed with your corporate card, bonus authorizations bearing your signature. I returned to my chair. What exactly would you challenge? She had no answer. The board meeting lasted 6 hours. Victoria emerged with a prepared statement announcing her resignation for personal reasons, effective immediately. Stock prices stabilized slightly, but the damage to her reputation was permanent. Divorce proceedings began while media coverage continued. Victoria's diminished position weakened her negotiating leverage significantly. Asset division favored me substantially, particularly since her company stock options became worthless following the scandal. The 5 employees were terminated within 2 weeks for policy violations. Their severance packages were canceled due to documented misconduct. Lance Dalton's LinkedIn profile now listed him as seeking new opportunities. Paige Morrison moved back to her hometown in Ohio. Miguel Santos took a position with a small firm at half his previous salary. Their loyalty had been expensive for Victoria and worthless for themselves. 3 months after Victoria's resignation, I maintained my consulting practice from the home office that had become command central for her downfall. The mahogany desk where I'd first discovered her expense reports now held contracts for legitimate business projects, though I still kept copies of the loyalty program documentation in a locked filing cabinet. The townhouse felt different without Victoria's presence. Quieter, less theatrical. The marble foyers no longer echoed with the sharp click of executive heels or the urgent buzz of corporate crisis calls. I'd grown accustomed to the peace. My phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. Patricia Walsh's name appeared on the caller ID. Alexander, I hope you don't mind the direct call. I have some follow-up questions about the Victoria situation. What kind of questions? I'm working on a broader piece about corporate governance and executive accountability. Your wife's case has become a template for investigating similar situations at other companies. I leaned back in my chair. Other companies? Turns out Victoria's loyalty program wasn't unique. We've identified at least 6 CEOs with comparable patterns. Systematic affairs with subordinates, bonus payments disguised as performance incentives, company resources used for personal relationships. 6 companies? So far, the pattern recognition software we developed from your documentation has been remarkably effective. Patricia's excitement was audible. We're calling it the Ashford algorithm. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria's systematic approach to corporate misconduct had become a tool for identifying similar behavior throughout the business world. What do you need from me? Consulting work, actually. We want to hire you to help analyze expense patterns at other companies. Your academic background in pattern recognition, combined with your practical experience identifying corporate fraud, makes you uniquely qualified. I considered the proposal. Legitimate work that utilized my actual skills while serving justice seemed appealing. What's the scope? Initially, 3 companies with suspicious executive expense patterns. If the pilot program succeeds, we'll expand to a dozen more. Full consulting fees, plus percentage of any recovered shareholder funds. Recovered funds? Shareholder lawsuits are proceeding against Victoria's company. Investors want reimbursement for fraudulent expenses. Your documentation is the foundation for their case. Patricia paused. You could be looking at substantial compensation for your role in exposing the fraud. The consulting contract arrived the following Monday. Patricia's media company had partnered with a law firm specializing in corporate governance litigation. My role involved analyzing expense patterns, identifying suspicious payment schedules, and providing expert testimony about systematic fraud indicators. The first case involved a technology CEO in Seattle whose employee development expenses showed remarkable similarity to Victoria's loyalty program. Hotel charges, bonus payments, and calendar entries aligned with mathematical precision. The second case featured a pharmaceutical executive whose research collaborations apparently required extensive travel with attractive junior staff members. Each investigation followed the template I'd developed for Victoria's case. Document everything. Cross-reference payments with travel records. Identify patterns that revealed systematic abuse rather than isolated incidents. Present evidence with academic precision that left no room for alternative explanations. The work was satisfying in ways my previous consulting had never been. Instead of helping corporations optimize their operations, I was helping expose corporate criminals who exploited their positions for personal gratification. Justice served with scholarly methodology. 6 months into the new career, I received an unexpected visitor. Lance Dalton appeared at my front door on a rainy Tuesday evening, looking considerably less polished than during his Victoria-funded days. His expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack business casual. His confident smile had vanished entirely. "Mr. Ashford, could we talk?" I studied him through the security monitor. He appeared harmless enough, though his presence suggested either desperation or stupidity. Possibly both. What about? "Victoria, the situation. I think you should know some things." Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Lance stepped inside, shaking rainwater from a discount store umbrella. "Nice place," he said, glancing around the foyer. "Thank you. What did you want to discuss?" "The loyalty program wasn't Victoria's idea originally." I led him to the living room, curious despite myself. "Whose idea was it?" "Richard Thornton, the board chairman." Lance settled into the sofa nervously. He's been running similar programs at his other companies for years. This was unexpected. Richard suggested Victoria implement this system? More than suggested. Required. Part of her employment agreement included maintaining flexible employee relations that would ensure absolute loyalty from key staff members. "You're saying the board chairman instructed Victoria to have affairs with subordinates?" Not explicitly, but the expectations were clear. Keep employees loyal through whatever means necessary. Provide appropriate incentives. Maintain discretion. Lance rubbed his temples. Victoria was following orders. I processed this revelation. Richard Thornton had seemed genuinely shocked by Victoria's behavior during our phone conversation. His performance had been remarkably convincing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Victoria's not the only one he destroyed. 3 other CEOs have been forced out using the same pattern. Thornton sets up the system, encourages the behavior, then leaks evidence to the press when he wants new leadership. Evidence suggests you participated willingly in Victoria's program." Lance's face reddened. "I needed the job, the promotion, the bonuses." He looked down at his hands. "Victoria made it clear that cooperation was expected for career advancement." "So you were coerced?" "We all were. Paige, Miguel, Jennifer, David. None of us wanted to participate, but refusing meant career termination. Victoria had complete control over our professional futures." I walked to the window, considering this new information. If Lance was telling the truth, Victoria had been both perpetrator and victim in a larger scheme orchestrated by Richard Thornton. "Do you have evidence of Thornton's involvement?" "Some. Email communications, meeting notes, policy documents. Nothing as comprehensive as what you compiled against Victoria, but enough to establish the pattern. Why haven't you gone to the authorities? With what credibility? I'm the guy who took money for sleeping with his boss. My testimony alone won't convince anyone. Lance leaned forward. But combined with your investigation skills and Patricia Walsh's media platform, we might be able to expose the real architect of these programs. The proposal was intriguing. Richard Thornton had played the role of shocked board member perfectly while potentially orchestrating Victoria's downfall from the beginning. If he'd implemented similar systems at multiple companies, the scope of corporate fraud could be enormous. What do you want in return? Help clearing our names. The 5 employees who got terminated deserve better than being labeled as corporate prostitutes. We were victims of systematic coercion, not willing participants in fraud. I considered the ethics of the situation. Victoria had certainly abused her power, but if she'd been following board directives, the moral responsibility shifted significantly. The employees had faced impossible choices between cooperation and career destruction. I'll need to see your evidence first. Lance produced a tablet from his briefcase. Email thread from Richard to Victoria, dated 6 months before the first bonus payment. The message was carefully worded but unmistakable. Ensure key staff members understand their career advancement depends on absolute loyalty to company leadership. Provide appropriate incentives for exceptional dedication. Maintain discretion regarding specific methodologies. Victoria's response was equally revealing. Understood. We'll implement flexible loyalty programs as discussed. Expect positive results within 90 days. There are dozens more, Lance said. Meeting summaries, policy discussions, budget approvals for employee retention initiatives. Richard micromanaged the entire system. And the other companies? Similar patterns. 3 CEOs forced out after implementing identical programs. Richard's private equity firm acquires controlling interests after the scandals drive down stock prices. The scope was breathtaking. Richard Thornton hadn't just enabled corporate misconduct, he'd weaponized it for financial gain. Set up CEOs to fail, profit from their destruction, repeat the process with new leadership. I'll need time to verify this information. Of course, but time is limited. Richard's already identified his next target. Another female CEO, another company with valuable assets and vulnerable stock prices. Lance left his contact information and promised additional documentation. After he departed, I sat in my office reviewing the implications. If his allegations were accurate, Victoria's loyalty program was part of a much larger criminal enterprise. I called Patricia Walsh. This is bigger than we thought, I told her after explaining Lance's visit. Victoria might have been a victim as much as a perpetrator. That doesn't excuse her behavior toward those employees. No, but it changes the moral calculus significantly. And if Richard Thornton is running similar operations at multiple companies, the financial fraud could be enormous. What do you want to do? Investigate. Carefully. If we're going after a board chairman with private equity connections, we need bulletproof evidence. I'm in. When do we start? Tomorrow. And Patricia? This time we're hunting bigger game. The investigation into Richard Thornton required different tactics than exposing Victoria's loyalty program. Board chairmen with private equity connections possessed resources and influence that could destroy careers, reputations, and potentially lives. We needed absolute precision. Patricia assembled a team of investigative journalists, forensic accountants, and corporate attorneys. I provided analytical framework and pattern recognition expertise. Lance Dalton became our primary source for internal documentation, though we verified everything independently. The evidence was damning once assembled comprehensively. Thornton's private equity firm had acquired controlling interests in 7 companies over the past 5 years. Each acquisition followed an identical pattern. Female CEO implements employee retention programs involving systematic affairs with subordinates, scandal breaks through anonymous media leaks, stock prices collapse, Thornton's firm purchases shares at discount prices. Victoria's company was the most recent example, but not the most profitable. A pharmaceutical company in Boston had netted Thornton's firm nearly $200 million after their CEO resigned following revelations about her research collaboration expenses. The methodology was brilliant in its simplicity. Thornton identified companies with valuable assets and vulnerable leadership. Female CEOs were preferred targets because affairs with male subordinates generated more sensational media coverage. He then structured employment agreements requiring flexible employee relations to ensure staff loyalty. Once the programs were operational, Thornton waited for optimal market conditions before leaking evidence to financial journalists. The resulting scandals destroyed CEO reputations while creating acquisition opportunities at significantly reduced prices. "He's been running this scheme for at least 8 years, Patricia reported during our team meeting. "Possibly longer, but documentation only goes back that far." "How many victims total?" I asked. 11 CEOs forced out, approximately 40 employees coerced into participating. Estimated shareholder losses exceed $500 million. She consulted her notes. Thornton's personal profits are around $300 million. The forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Jennifer Martinez, had traced money flows through multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. The fraud is systematic and sophisticated. He's got legal teams structuring everything to minimize criminal exposure while maximizing financial gain. What about the employees who were coerced? Thornton's companies require comprehensive NDAs as part of severance agreements, Jennifer explained. Anyone who speaks publicly about the programs faces immediate lawsuits and financial destruction. Lance had been fortunate to avoid signing such agreements because his termination was handled hastily during Victoria's media crisis. The other employees from Victoria's company had been less lucky. "We need more sources," I concluded. "One witness won't be sufficient against Thornton's legal resources." Patricia nodded. "I've identified 3 former CEOs who might be willing to cooperate. All were destroyed by similar scandals. All have reasons to want revenge against Thornton. And current targets? 2 companies show suspicious expense patterns, CEOs implementing loyalty programs, unusual bonus structures, systematic affairs with subordinates." She handed me files. "Both fit Thornton's preferred profile perfectly." I reviewed the documentation. The patterns were unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Hotel expenses, discretionary bonuses, calendar entries showing private meetings with attractive staff members. Thornton's playbook executed with precision. Timeline for exposing current operations? 6 weeks maximum. Any longer and he'll complete the acquisition cycles. Once he owns controlling interests, the evidence becomes irrelevant. The next phase required infiltration. We needed internal documentation from Thornton's private equity firm showing his direct involvement in orchestrating the scandals. Email communications, meeting records, acquisition strategies that explicitly referenced the loyalty programs. Lance proved valuable for this phase. His relationship with Victoria had provided access to board communications and strategic planning documents. More importantly, he'd maintained contact with employees at other Thornton-controlled companies. "Paige Morrison is working at one of his pharmaceutical companies now," Lance reported. "Entry-level position, but she's desperate to rebuild her career. Might be willing to help if we can offer protection from the NDAs." "Legal protection?" "Jennifer Martinez thinks we can challenge the NDAs as contracts signed under duress. If employees were coerced into the original programs, agreements signed afterward might be invalid." We approached Paige carefully. Her experience with Victoria's loyalty program had left her bitter and financially desperate. The promise of legal protection and potential compensation for her cooperation proved persuasive. "I have copies of everything," she told us during a clandestine meeting at a suburban restaurant. "Email threads, meeting summaries, policy documents. I kept records because I knew eventually someone would need proof of what really happened." Her documentation was comprehensive. Thornton's involvement was explicit in dozens of communications. Strategic planning documents outlined acquisition targets and expected timelines for scandal-driven stock price collapses. Most damaging was a recorded phone conversation between Thornton and Victoria discussing employee motivation techniques and ensuring absolute staff loyalty through personalized incentive programs. Victoria's voice was uncertain, asking for clarification about expectations. Thornton's responses left no doubt about the required methodology. "This is criminal conspiracy," Jennifer Martinez concluded after reviewing Page's evidence. "Systematic fraud, market manipulation, coercion, racketeering. We're looking at federal charges across multiple jurisdictions. What about the current targets? We warn them immediately. Provide evidence of Thornton's scheme and help them avoid the trap." Patricia consulted her timeline. "Then we go public with everything simultaneously." The coordinated exposure required precise timing. We contacted both current target CEOs, provided comprehensive documentation about Thornton's scheme, and helped them restructure their companies to avoid the loyalty program requirements. Simultaneously, we prepared media packages for major financial publications, compiled evidence for federal prosecutors, and organized testimony from multiple victims across Thornton's various companies. The story broke on a Wednesday morning across 6 major publications simultaneously. Board chairman orchestrates CEO scandals for profit. The evidence was overwhelming, the scope breathtaking, the implications enormous. Thornton's private equity firm lost 60% of its value within hours. Federal investigators announced criminal probes. Securities regulators froze assets pending fraud investigations. His carefully constructed empire began collapsing in real time. Victoria called that evening. "I saw the news," she said without preamble. "About Richard and the scheme. Yes. I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. The employees, the coercion, the fraud. I thought I was following legitimate board directives." "I understand." "Do you? Really?" Her voice carried genuine anguish. "I destroyed people's lives because I was too weak to resist Richard's manipulation." "You made choices. Richard created the circumstances, but you implemented the programs." "I know. I accept responsibility for my actions. But I want you to know that I never meant to hurt anyone." "What will you do now?" "Testify against Richard. Help the federal prosecutors build their case. Try to make amends to the employees I coerced." She paused. "And accept whatever consequences come from my choices." "That seems appropriate." "Alexander, thank you." "For what?" "For exposing the truth. All of it. Richard would have continued destroying people if you hadn't stopped him." The federal case against Thornton proceeded rapidly. 11 former CEOs testified about coercion and manipulation. 43 employees provided evidence of systematic abuse. Financial experts documented hundreds of millions in fraudulent transactions. Victoria's testimony was particularly damaging. She provided detailed accounts of Thornton's instructions, policy requirements, and threats regarding career consequences for non-compliance. Her recordings of their conversations became cornerstone evidence for conspiracy charges. Lance, Page, and the other coerced employees were granted immunity in exchange for their cooperation. Federal prosecutors recognized them as victims rather than willing participants in the fraud. Thornton was convicted on 17 federal charges, including conspiracy, fraud, market manipulation, and racketeering. His sentence of 25 years in federal prison effectively ended his criminal enterprise permanently. The civil lawsuits recovered over $400 million for defrauded shareholders and victimized employees. My consulting work with the investigation teams earned substantial compensation, but more importantly, it established a new career focused on exposing corporate fraud rather than enabling corporate efficiency. Patricia Walsh won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series on systematic corporate misconduct. Her reporting had exposed not just individual criminals, but an entire methodology for weaponizing executive power for financial gain. 6 months after Thornton's conviction, I received a letter from Victoria. She was working as a business ethics consultant, helping companies implement genuine governance reforms and employee protection policies. Her experience as both perpetrator and victim provided unique insights into preventing systematic abuse. "I'll never fully atone for what I did to those employees," she wrote. "But perhaps I can help prevent other executives from making similar choices. Richard created the circumstances, but I chose to participate rather than resist. That responsibility is mine alone." I filed the letter with the rest of the case documentation. Justice had been served, truth had been exposed, and systematic corporate fraud had been replaced with genuine accountability. The loyalty program was finally over. 2 years after Thornton's conviction, I had established myself as the premier consultant for identifying corporate fraud patterns. My academic background in literature, combined with practical experience exposing systematic misconduct, created a unique skill set that law firms and regulatory agencies valued highly. The home office that once housed Victoria's expense reports now contained files from dozens of investigations. Corporate executives who exploited their positions for personal gain had become my specialty, and business was unfortunately robust. Patricia Walsh had parlayed her Pulitzer Prize into a best-selling book about corporate accountability. The Loyalty Trap: How Executives Weaponize Power had become required reading in business schools and ethics courses. She frequently consulted with my investigations, providing media expertise that ensured maximum exposure for corporate criminals. Lance Dalton had rebuilt his career as an advocate for employee rights in corporate environments. His experience with Victoria's loyalty program, combined with his business development background, made him an effective spokesperson for workplace protection legislation. He testified regularly before congressional committees about systematic abuse and coercion in corporate settings. The 5 employees from Victoria's original program had all found new positions and received substantial settlements from the civil lawsuits. Paige Morrison was working as a marketing director for a nonprofit organization focused on corporate ethics. Miguel Santos had completed his MBA and was teaching business ethics at a community college. Jennifer Walsh and David Kim had started their own consulting firm specializing in employee protection policies. Victoria continued her work as a business ethics consultant, though our contact remained limited to professional correspondence about ongoing investigations. She had testified in 17 federal cases involving corporate misconduct, helping prosecutors understand the psychology of executive coercion and systematic abuse. On a Thursday afternoon in October, my phone rang with a familiar number. "Alexander? This is Richard Thornton." I nearly dropped the phone. "You're supposed to be in federal prison." "I am. This is a monitored call from the correctional facility. I have information you need to hear." "I'm not interested in anything you have to say. It's about Victoria. She's in danger." Despite my better judgment, I remained on the line. "What kind of danger?" "My business partners didn't appreciate the federal investigation. They blame Victoria's testimony for my conviction. There are people who want revenge." "Your former associates are threatening Victoria?" "More than threatening. They've hired professionals to handle the situation permanently." Thornton's voice carried genuine urgency. "Victoria doesn't know. She thinks the danger ended with my conviction." "Why are you warning me?" "Because despite everything that happened, Victoria was manipulated into participating in my scheme. She doesn't deserve to die for following orders I gave her." I processed this information carefully. Thornton had proven himself capable of elaborate deceptions, but his current circumstances provided little incentive for complex schemes. "What specific information do you have?" "Names, timeline, methodology. My former partners contracted with a firm that specializes in making problems disappear permanently. Victoria is scheduled to be eliminated within the next 72 hours. "How do you know this?" "Prison communications are more flexible than people assume. My former associates wanted me to know that loose ends were being addressed. Thornton paused. They expect me to approve of their solution. And you don't? Victoria was following my instructions. Punishing her for my crimes is unjust, even by criminal standards. I found myself in the surreal position of receiving ethical guidance from a convicted felon, but Thornton's logic was sound. Victoria had been manipulated into implementing his scheme and had cooperated fully with federal investigators afterward. What do you want me to do? Warn her. Help her disappear until law enforcement can address the threat. Provide protection that she can't arrange for herself. Why don't you contact federal authorities directly? I did. They're investigating, but bureaucratic processes take time. Victoria doesn't have time. His voice hardened. These people are professionals. They don't miss deadlines. After ending the call, I immediately contacted Patricia Walsh and explained the situation. She had maintained relationships with federal prosecutors from the Thornton investigation and could expedite official protection for Victoria. This is serious, Patricia confirmed after making preliminary calls. FBI sources indicate credible threats against multiple witnesses from the Thornton case. They're working on protective custody arrangements, but the process could take days. Victoria needs protection immediately. Agreed. Can you contact her directly? I called Victoria's consulting firm and was told she was attending a business ethics conference in Chicago. The timing was problematic. Public venues with predictable schedules provided ideal opportunities for professional elimination. My next call was to Lance Dalton. His advocacy work had connected him with security professionals who specialized in protecting corporate whistleblowers and federal witnesses. I can have a team in Chicago within 6 hours, Lance assured me. Former federal agents who understand these kinds of threats. They'll provide protection until official arrangements are finalized. What about costs? The settlement funds from Thornton's civil cases included provisions for witness protection. This qualifies as legitimate use of those resources. While Lance arranged security, I called Victoria's hotel directly. Victoria Ashford, please. I'm sorry, but Ms. Ashford checked out early. She left a message that her conference presentation had been canceled due to a family emergency. My concern intensified. Victoria had no family members who would constitute emergencies. Either she had detected the threat independently, or someone had already made contact. Did she leave forwarding information? No, sir. She settled her account and departed around noon. I immediately called Patricia with this development. FBI is taking this seriously now, she reported. They're treating Victoria as a missing witness in active danger. Full federal resources are being deployed. Any leads on her location? They're tracking her phone, credit cards, vehicle registration, standard witness protection protocols. Patricia paused. Alexander, there's something else. Federal agents want to interview you about the threat. Thornton's call was recorded, and they need to verify the information. 2 FBI agents arrived at my house within an hour. Special Agent Sarah Chen and Special Agent Michael Torres specialized in organized crime and witness protection cases. Mr. Ashford, we need to understand exactly what Richard Thornton told you about threats against Victoria Ashford, Agent Chen began. I recounted the conversation in detail, including Thornton's claims about professional contractors and 72-hour timelines. Did Thornton provide specific names or organizations? No. He mentioned former business partners and professional firms, but no identifying details. Agent Torres consulted his notes. We've identified 3 individuals with connections to Thornton's private equity firm who have criminal backgrounds. All disappeared from their known addresses within the past week. Disappeared? Professional cleanup. These people don't leave traces when they're working. Agent Chen leaned forward. Mr. Ashford, we believe Victoria detected surveillance and attempted to evade the threat independently. Her current location is unknown. Is that good or bad? Depends on her evasion skills versus their tracking abilities. Professional contractors are persistent and resourceful. The agents left after providing contact information and instructions to report any communication from Victoria immediately. I spent the evening reviewing everything I knew about her habits, preferences, and likely hiding places. Victoria was intelligent and cautious, but she had no training in evading professional surveillance. Her business background provided analytical skills, but physical security required different expertise entirely. My phone rang at 11:30. "Alexander, it's Victoria. Don't trace this call or contact authorities while we're talking." "Where are you?" "Safe for now. I detected surveillance yesterday and implemented evasion protocols." Her voice was steady but strained. "I need your help. FBI agents were here today. They're looking for you with full federal resources." "I know, but federal protection takes time to arrange, and I don't have time. These people are professionals." "How do you know about the threat?" "Anonymous call yesterday morning. Male voice, very specific details about my schedule, hotel room number, conference presentation topics. He suggested I reconsider my cooperation with federal prosecutors." "What did you do?" "Checked out immediately and implemented contingency plans I'd prepared after Thornton's conviction. I always suspected his associates might want revenge." "Where are you now?" "I can't tell you specifics, but I'm approximately 200 miles from Chicago in a secure location." Victoria paused. "Alexander, I need you to coordinate with federal authorities while maintaining plausible deniability about my location." "What do you mean?" "Tell them I contacted you but didn't reveal where I was hiding. Provide cooperation without compromising my security. I'll surface once they've neutralized the immediate threat." "How long will that take?" "Unknown. These people are patient and well-funded. Federal investigations could take weeks or months." We discussed communication protocols and safety procedures for the next 20 minutes. Victoria had clearly thought through contingency planning extensively, but her situation remained precarious. "Alexander, thank you for warning me about Thornton's call. Without that information, I might not have detected the surveillance in time." "Stay safe, Victoria." "I intend to." The federal investigation proceeded intensively over the following weeks. 3 suspects with connections to Thornton's criminal enterprise were arrested on various charges. Electronic surveillance revealed extensive planning for eliminating federal witnesses from the original case. Victoria remained hidden during this period, communicating only through secure channels and providing federal agents with detailed information about the threats she had received. Her testimony helped prosecutors build additional cases against Thornton's former associates. 6 weeks after the initial threat, federal authorities announced successful resolution of the witness intimidation conspiracy. All identified suspects were in custody, and protective measures for federal witnesses had been enhanced permanently. Victoria emerged from hiding and resumed her consulting work under federal witness protection protocols. Her experience evading professional contractors had provided additional expertise in personal security that enhanced her value as a corporate ethics consultant. The entire episode reinforced lessons about the long-term consequences of corporate fraud. Thornton's criminal enterprise had tentacles that extended far beyond his original scheme, creating ongoing dangers for everyone involved in exposing his activities. Justice had been served, but the price of corporate accountability remained high for everyone who chose to resist systematic abuse of power. The loyalty program's final chapter was finally closed.